I think I just recorded that. Oops. Okay. So we are, today we're working with databases. So last time we got to, if you didn't follow along with me last time, you'll want to pick up where we left off. So come over here and download read DB W19, get that downloaded and get it opened. But what we did last time we were together was we saw how Excel has built-in tools just to read data from databases, and then we duplicated one of those tools using VBA, but still didn't extend it beyond what we could have done just with the Excel interface. So today we're going to see how can we write data back to a database from VBA. And so now we're doing something that Excel just can't do by itself out of the box, requires some VBA to do that. I'm going to go ahead and save this file as, instead of read, write, because now we'll be writing data to it here. Oh, and we have all these sheets. We have way too many sheets here. I'm going to delete off all these sheets except for sheet number 1. And then we'll take a look at, delete, come back over here. Oh, and so you remember, this next part, you could just watch if you want to. You don't have to do this to be able to follow the example, but if you want to do it along with me, you're more than welcome to do it. I'm going to come back to data.websql.org, and I'm going to log in with VBA student and the password that we set up here. Oh, I think we already have that stuff here. Okay, so, and we saw how to select information out of a table. So here I'm going to select all columns from a table called survey that's owned by a different user, VBA prof. So it turns out there's not very much data in this table right now. It's completely empty. But the whole point here is that we're going to see what does it take to insert data into it. So far we've seen the select statement in structured query language. How do we pull data out of a database? Now to push data into it, it requires the insert into statement. And so I'm just going to come here and do another query in front of this one, insert into. I am going to tell the table that I want to insert into. That's the same one here, VBA prof.survey. Okay, so then after that in parentheses, I put the names of the columns that I want to put. I don't have to put data into all the columns. I can pick and choose the ones, and depending on how the tables was built, it may say, sorry, you've got to supply a value. You can actually, when you set the table up, you can say not allowed to have a record if there's no value for this particular column. But I don't think that's the case for any of these, and so we can kind of pick and choose the ones we want to plug in. So I'm going to list the ones that we want. Now I can't put a value in for survey ID because that will be automatically generated by the database management system. So I'll tell it I'm putting some information in, and it will automatically give me another unique value for the survey ID. But I'm just going to bring all the rest of these in, and this is a comma-separated list of column names. So far I've told it we're going to be inserting data, we're going to be putting it into a particular table, and now we're telling the columns that we're going to be putting data into. The only thing that remains is for me to tell it what values to put into those columns. And so I do that with the values clause, V-A-L-U-E-S. In fact, I'm going to bring that down onto the next line so the values will kind of go underneath their column names. It's all just one long string, but I'm going to do it here in a couple of different lines. And again, I'll put parentheses for the values. Now these values have to just match in order to the way that I've specified the column. So customer ID, should have had another one of these open. I'm just going to open up another window here. And I'm going to select. We're actually going to, the idea on this survey is that we're going to take a particular customer and we are going to have him give us his opinion about a particular manufacturer. So let me select star from redcat.customer, C-U-S-T-O-M-E-R. I just want to see, I want to use valid numbers for customers and for manufacturers. And I'll limit this just to 10 records. All right, So it looks like if I'm trying to say that Ulysses Reeves is the one who's doing this particular survey, I'm going to put a customer ID in of 29. So the customer ID is going to be 29. And if I'm saying he's giving me an evaluation for a particular manufacturer, see one that I'm familiar with, Timberland. I think I've even owned some Timberland shoes. That's, I don't need the name. It's 240 is the number of that particular manufacturer. So 240. Favor. So the question is, how favorable is my opinion of this? This is a scale of 1 to 10. I'm going to put in here, I don't know, 8. They're pretty good shoes. And then a comment. This is a string. So string literals in structured query language, instead of using double quotes, I use single quotes. It's a little different than VBA here. But now this would be the comment. Nice shoes, I don't know. And if I'm going to execute more than one structured query language statement in a block, I've got to separate them by semicolons. So now that should insert a record into here and then select those back. It may be that some of you have beaten me to the select, at least one of you did, and you typed exactly the same thing. No creativity at all. I don't know. Maybe someone else has done something here. Just see what else we've got in there. And has anyone else put anything in there? Yeah, a few more. Nice shoes, dude. Very good. So, and of course, you could pick different customer numbers, different manufacturers, but that's the idea. Okay, so that's just the structured query language part of it. We're going to have to now build the structured query language statement in Excel to be able to do the insert. All right. So let's go ahead and start by kind of building a place for the user to put this information in. So I'm just going to come to A1, and I'm going to call this the customer ID, manufacturer ID, customer ID, manufacturer ID. What was next? The favorability, and the comment. Was it just the 4? I think so. Quite sure how to zoom in on my trackpad. Okay, so I'm going to choose a different customer. A valid customer, so I'm going to do customer number Alex, last name I can't pronounce, is customer number 40. Manufacturer Ralph Lauren, 176. Favorability rating, 8. Ralph Lauren makes paint. Did you know that? I may not actually make it. I like their paint. Okay, so the idea here is that the user can type this in, and then we give them some way to say, I want to insert this into the database, and we'll have code that pushes it into the database. So now let's get down to the code. So I'm going to come back to our VBA, and I'm going to take the example that we finished on DB2, and I'm going to copy it. And we'll just call this DB insert. Okay, now what DB2 did was it read data off of the database. We gave it a select statement, it, identified those records and sent those records back to us for us to be able to work with. And so there we need a connection and a record set. We got to get connected to the database, and we need a different object to handle the records that we're bringing back. But in this case, we're not going to be bringing back any records, and so we don't need the record set object. So connection object we do need, record set object we don't need. We still need a connection string. We still need a structured query language statement. Since we're not going to be looking over rows and columns to drop the data onto the worksheet, we won't need those. Same connection string. We're going to open the same way. And let me just kind of give myself a little space after the SQL. We'll have to change the SQL. But then I think the rest of this we don't need. So I'm just going to kind of delete down until I find the CN close. So we still need to close the connection object. And what are we doing here? Oh, we're like auto-fitting and then making this into a table. We don't need that as well. Okay, so we've really reduced the code just to getting ourselves connected to the database. So now we're ready to formulate the SQL statement. I'm just going to copy the one that I had over here, the insert statement, and we're going to play with this a little bit here in VBA. I think I am going to go ahead and break it this way onto 2 lines, but to do that in VBA, I actually have to end the first string, concatenate it, and put the line continuation character, which is just the underscore. Then I should be able to start the next string. And now it's 2 string literals, but it's 1 statement that's bringing them together. I'm not sure I've ever used the line continuation character in class before. But the recorder records it a lot, so no doubt you've seen it. But here now we have the statement set up. Now, if I was just to execute this statement, it would execute the same information. You know, customer number 29, who was it? Timberland as the manufacturer, and an 8 out of 10, nice shoes. So we want to instead pull the information off the worksheet. Now, it's tempting for us to say, well, let's just compose the string right here, right? We'll just come here, we'll stop the string, we'll concatenate in whatever is in B1, whatever's in B2, B3, B4. But these queries can get really complex. And if I do that, the code gets hard to find where the errors are. And so I'm going to take a little different approach that will isolate the different changes that we're making, and I think it will make your life go a little bit better. By the way, all the stuff that I'm doing today is to help you with the database project. So we've got the project coming up, and this is, you want to think of this as the guide for doing the database part of the data insertion part of that project. So instead of 29, I'm going to replace all of these values just with the column names themselves. I'm just going to copy my column names, and I'm going to paste that right over the actual values. And then I'm going to do something to make these unique, and I'm just going to make them look kind of like XML tags. I'm just going to put angle brackets, greater than and less than signs around them. The idea here is to say I'm going to kind of set up my SQL syntax where it's pretty straightforward to see. And then I'm going to use the string replace function to replace where it says customer ID with the actual customer ID that is on the worksheet. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to separate the SQL syntax from the VBA syntax. Because as soon as I start trying to mix those onto one line, we can make it work, but it gets really, really ugly. So now my SQL statement is there, it's beautiful, it's not ready to execute because I can't insert this into the customer ID column. I've got to actually change that to a number. So that's what's going to come next. So now after I've got it set up, I'm just going to say SQL equals, and I'll call the replace function. Remember, the replace function looks for every occurrence looks at a string, finds every occurrence of one string, and replaces it with another string. So I'm going to look at my SQL statement. I'm going to look for the tag. So I'm going to copy this multiple times. I'm just going to kind of get it set up. Go ahead and just put the tag in there. And I'm going to replace it with whatever is on, oh, I forgot the sheet. What's our sheet? Sheet 1. I'm not so thrilled with sheet 1. Let's go ahead and make a sheet variable. So let me dim S as a worksheet. Set S equal to worksheets. Sheet 1. Okay, so now I can say s.cells row number 1, column number 2, and I want the value of that. Okay, so that's what I'm going to replace it with. So I'm going to look for, well, let me go ahead and get it copied, and then we'll get the first one fully specified, then we'll talk about the syntax here. So I'm looking for angle bracket, customer ID, angle bracket. And I'm going to replace it with whatever customer ID they put in there. Then I'll do the same thing with manufacturer ID. And now that's going to be row 2, row 3, and row 4. And we'll get the other field names in here as well. So these angle brackets that I'm putting in here, they're nothing special about SQL. It's just a character that I'm putting here in VBA for the sole purpose of being able to replace that value. Do you see what's happening here? So now, by the time we've run here to this line here, let's just go ahead and run to here and stop. Let me stop right here. I'll run this code, and let's take a look at, oh, actually, don't all of you run this with me because I'm keeping the connection open. And we don't want to have that many open connections simultaneously to the database. But now I should be able to look here at SQL, and it's, I've got all these parameters here just the way I had them before, but I've already replaced the first one with 40. So we got to this statement right here. It said, let's look at SQL the way it's set up, find the customer ID tag, and replace that whole thing with whatever is in cell B1. And so that's how that 40 got here. If we go through these one at a time, 8. We've got the next one. Now we should have replaced the manufacturer with the manufacturer's number. Oops, hope I get the right key here. Might be time for me to get new glasses. I can't see my keyboard anymore. Now I've got the, oh, looks like I did something wrong here. Oh, I skipped number 3. So you see, I accidentally put the comment in where the favorability rating goes. So I'm going to go ahead and kill my code and say, no, it shouldn't be row 4 there. That should be row 3, and this should be row 4. I'll go ahead and move my stop down to after the SQL is fully created. I'll run this again. And now my SQL should be fully specified. I'm almost there. What am I missing on this statement? I have single quotes around that string literal that's now in the SQL. So this is something that's going to be a little bit of a struggle for us, but I'm going to start off by putting it right here inside my kind of templated query here. And so now when I run that, that should be ready to execute. And I could copy that over and execute it in the web SQL interface, and it should insert just fine. Looks like syntactically it's all there. So our next step is, how do we tell the VBA to actually execute that query? And it turns out that the connection object, CN, has a property called, or has a method called execute. All I have to do is give it the SQL that I want to execute. And so that should tell the server to execute that statement. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of my stop here. I will execute that. Actually, I'm going to go do that one more time by putting something a little bit different in. Don't you do this one because I want to be able to see the one that I've done. I'll put in George Washington's horse. Or just George Washington. We'll get to George Washington's horse in a minute. So I'll execute that again. And I'm going to select this, but I'm going to bring them back in reverse order according to the survey ID. That'll put the most recent one at the top. Order by survey ID in descending order. Okay, so it looks like we've got it in just fine. All right, so let's take a moment right here just to pause and make sure that everyone who's working the example along is getting their data to go into the database. So, any questions? All right, so when you have when you get an error here on the line where you're trying to execute it, that's for one of two reasons. One, either you're not getting connected to the database, and so that could be an issue of being on the right network that will route port 1433 traffic. But the other one could be that you've connected to the database and you gave it the SQL to execute, but the SQL is no good. It can't figure out what you're talking about. And so what I like to do is do a debug.print right here. of SQL. And so now it will print out my SQL just before it goes to execute it. So let me go ahead and clear that, run this again. And so I'm seeing that, so that if I have an error, then I've got the statement that caused the error, and we can take a look at it. Okay, so far so good. Now let's look at what might be able to go wrong. Instead of inserting my comment involving George Washington, I'm going to insert George Washington's horse. Apostrophe S, horse. That seems like a reasonable thing to do. Now I'll execute this. I get the statement printed up here, but I have incorrect syntax near S. Bummer. I'll end that. In fact, maybe what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and bring this whole statement back over to my web interface and just print that in here and see what it tells me here. So this error message that I get here is a little bit better. I get the first one, incorrect syntax near S, but now I get unclosed quotation mark after the character string something. So what's going on? Yeah, that apostrophe S is causing me troubles. So I think about this statement, we're used to working with the VBA interpreter, right? We got to write VBA so that the VBA interpreter can understand it. Well, we still have to do that, but we also have to compose SQL syntax inside our VBA. We got to compose a valid SQL statement, because when we pass that statement off to the database management system, there's another parser there that's going to parse that SQL, and you have to figure it out. So it comes along here and it says insert into. It says, I know exactly what you're trying to do. I get that, insert into. VBA prof.survey, it looks through all of his tables and it goes, yep, there's a table called that, perfect. And then it looks at all these columns and says, perfect, these are all columns in that table. Values, it says, just what I'm expecting, open parenthesis, of 40, comma, great, I'm getting all these values. It gets to that quote, it goes, I'm starting a string literal. It goes, George Washington, it gets to that quote, and it says, great, that's the end of the string, and it gets to that S right there, and it says, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? Because that's a single quote, it terminates the single quote string. Oh, so I got to do something to convince that interpreter, no. This doesn't end the string, this is just a quote inside the string. Any thoughts on how I'm going to do that? In the back, go ahead. So one thought, this is kind of a newer approach in the world of programming, is they'll say, listen, you can use double quotes or single quotes, whatever you want. If you want to put a single quote inside your string, use double quotes on the outside. That's what you're talking about? Yeah, so a language like JavaScript or Python would let us do that. Structured query language was made in the 1970s. We hadn't thought of that yet. It's a pretty good idea, but we hadn't thought of it yet. So the only way that we indicate a string literal is with single quotes. So that one won't do it for us. Go ahead. Do you mean quote? When you say parentheses, do you mean quote? So you say we could somehow concatenate these together. I think you're on the right road, but we don't really have to concatenate it to solve the problem. And this is actually the same problem that we have if we want to put a double quote inside of a VBA string, because we use double quotes to signal when the string is. Well, what do we do if we want to put a double quote inside for VBA? We put two of them side by side, which is not a very intuitive solution to this problem. So here's what happens, is that the interpreter comes along and finds that single quote right there, and it goes, great. Start a quote, all these characters are inside the string, and it gets to this one here, and it says, aha, this is the end of the string. But wait a minute. It could be that this isn't the end of the string, it's just a quote inside the string, and the secret code that we do to tell it that, hey, that's inside the string is that we just put another quote straight after it. So if the very next character is a quote, then the SQL interpreter goes, oh, that's not the end of the string. That's just one quote inside the string. And so it goes, great. So it puts on the W and the S and the H and the T and the O and the N, and then it gets here and it goes, oh yeah, that's just a quote. So it puts a quote onto the string, and it realizes we're still in the string. Gets to the S, gets to the all the way to the HORSE, and it gets to this one and it thinks, I think this is the end of the string. But wait a minute, let me check and see if the next character is a quote. and it looks at the next character and it goes, that's a close parenthesis. It goes, oh, that really was the end of the string, and it moves on. And so that's what we have to do to be able to get that to execute. So no problem. All you have to do is train your users when they want to type in a quote, just to type in 2 quotes instead of 1. Is that a winning solution to this problem? It's a solution, maybe not a winning solution. Let me go ahead and execute that now. And I think we'll see that this executes okay. No error. I'm going to come back here and pull that list off. We should see, yeah, there's George Washington's horse wins the Triple Crown. We got them both. Whoever threw that in was quite clever. But we got the single quote in there, which is what we were trying to do. Now, of course, we don't want to have to train the users. Can you imagine going to a web page, this little note, when you type in your comment, if you want to put a single quote, put 2 single quotes, together. Yeah, we're not doing that. So we've got to make VBA do that for us. So let's do this. So when I come in here, I'm going to just reorganize my code a little bit here to kind of put this block together and set it off. So when I get to this comment that I'm putting in here, the comment's different than all the rest of the fields because the rest of the fields are numeric. There's no quotes in. I don't have to worry about a quote being a numeric variable. But the string variables, I do have to worry about there being a quote in it. And so here's what I'm going to do. Instead of just putting that value in there, I'm going to wrap another replace function around it. Ugh. Anytime I go to write a replace function kind of inside of a line, I get a little bit worried that I'm going to mess something up. So I'm going to try to put the syntax in first. Replace. Ooh. Should be more worried that I can type it correctly. R-E-P-L-A-C-E. Oh no. Go back. What have I done? Oh, there's the S. Good. R-E-P-L-A-C-E. All right. Now I'm going to come. Now my first argument, what I'm going to be looking at is whatever is in that cell, and then right after that I'll put a comma. I'm going to be looking for some string. I'm just going to put a couple of quotes in there to get myself started. I'm going to replace it with some other string and put my close parenthesis in. Okay, so now that I've got the syntax in there, I can come back and think about what I'm really looking for. So what do I want to do? I'm looking at what they've typed in. I want to look for every occurrence of a single quote, and I'm going to replace it with 2 single quotes. If there was ever code that's hard to look at and understand, it's that right there. Let me zoom in just a bit. Where's my plus? Shift plus. Oh, that's zoomed in. Ugh. There we go. All right, so there's 1 single quote. There's 2 single quotes inside double quotes. Same thing here. It's a single quote inside double quotes. That's funny. So I'm looking for every occurrence of a single quote and replacing it with 2 single quotes. Question? Yeah, the outside is double quotes, right? Because and the thing here is that SQL uses a different character to indicate a string literal. It uses single quotes. Thank goodness it uses single quotes instead of double quotes. Otherwise, it would be an even bigger mess to deal with. So the VBA part of us here says, I've got to have a string literal here. And so we use double quotes to mark the string literal. And what's inside the double quote string literal is just a single quote. Yeah, because what we're doing here is we're trying to build up the string that we can then pass off to the structured query language interpreter. All right. And how do I get out of this? Oh, it got up by itself. Good. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and execute this and see what I get. No error, that looks good. And I have George Washington's horse, but I have it twice. I mean, I got 2 quotes. Why do I have 2? Wait a minute. What's gone wrong here? How do I zoom in here? Control plus. I think this is mine right here. Why do I have 2 quotes? Well, because that's what I told it to put in. I told it to put in 2 quotes. And so for that to actually execute, what did that have to look like, in the SQL statement? George Washington's horse, quote, 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 4 quotes. Because then each one of those, the interpreter looks at it and goes, oh, that's just a single quote. Oh, here's the next one. Oh, that's just a single quote. It collapses them both down. So what I'm really after is not having to type this in as 2 single quotes. Run this. And that should give me, uh-oh, I've zoomed in too much. Control minus. And so George Washington's dog, this must be it right here. So now I've got it here with a single quote. All right. You know, when you guys put up other things besides the example, I'm glad I don't have to worry about it being vulgar or in some way embarrassing. So thank you. So questions on this part so far here. I hope I haven't given you any ideas, you know, here. So remember, we're recording this for YouTube, so it'll be, you know, we'll be doing this for posterity and whatever. Was there a question over here? No? Okay. Okay, so if there's no, well, what happens if there's no single quote? Well, if there's no single quote, we're going to get to this replace function, and we're going to say, great, we're going to look at whatever is in row 4, column 2, so B4. It's going to find every occurrence of a single quote and replace it with 2 single quotes. And so if there's no occurrence to find, it'll still replace them all, just none of them to replace. Okay, next thing, and what I'm doing right now here is I'm thinking about all the questions that people typically have when they're working on the project. And I'm trying to head them off. So the stuff we're looking at right now, this is stuff that is going to be directly relevant to the project. Parker, if you think of others that I'm not covering, we should, you know, record it. I don't know. Let me cover a couple more and then we'll see where we are. All right, so, oh, I know what you mean by cleaning. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Let's do this. I'm going to insert one that doesn't have a comment at all. So let's think about what the query is going to, we don't have to think about it because we're going to see it right here. So let me clear off my queries. Let me run this again. Now that looks a little bit strange. Just quote, quote. So what I've just done is I've inserted for the comment a 0-length string. That should be okay. I mean, it looks like it executed okay. Should be able to come here and submit this. I've got a couple now here that are blank. I inserted one. Some of you else, you know, inserted another one. Now, as it turns out, this question about the absence of a value is a complex idea in database management. It looks like there's no value there. But what you really have there is you have a 0-length string. And a 0-length string is, it's a string with no characters. That's different than having no value. In the world of relational database management, when we're talking about having no value, there's a key word for that, and the key word is null. Let me go ahead and select this. I only want to see the ones where it's blank here. So let me put a where clause on here. And I want to select where the comment equals a 0-length string. And I should see at least those 2. Presumably some more have gone in. So we've got now 4 that have been entered in here. But there's a keyword null, N-U-L-L. And null is really the way in database we say the absence of a value. In fact, the guy that invented the relational model, his name was Edward Codd. Did I tell you this? He worked for IBM. He was a researcher at IBM. He made this proposal. IBM kind of ignored him until Oracle actually implemented it. IBM said, "Oh, maybe that was a pretty good idea." And they came back. But Ted, he went by Ted. He said, of all the things that I wish we had done differently when we set up this whole approach, it was the way that we deal with null. And so, kind of out of the box, we're saying this is something that the creator thought could have been better. And so let me execute that, and what we're going to find out is that there are no records where it has the absence of a value. So null means one of 2 things, and this is the problem. It either means for this particular survey, for this record, there was no comment. In other words, this survey didn't have a comment. It doesn't have a comment at all. Or it could equally mean it may have a comment, but we just don't know what it is. And null means one of those 2 things. We don't know which one it means. In both cases, it means the absence of a value, but we don't know if the value is out there. We just don't know it. or if this entity just doesn't have a value for that particular column. So, and as it turns out, because part of this notion is it could be an unknown value. I'm going to do one more thing in here. I'm going to come right in here, and I'm just going to add another column here in front of all these other ones. For right now, let me just put the word, I'm going to put a 1 right there. And I got to have at least one record coming back to be able to see that. So where comment equals quote, quote. Okay, so now I've got this column here that actually has that 1. It goes on to every column. You know, I can put an expression here, 1 plus 1, and that should give me 2 in that first column. I can put 1 equals 1. I'm not sure that'll give me true or if it'll give me an error. It probably gives me an error. Okay, that was an ill-formed idea to help you understand that. So let's forget, let's rewind and not actually record that part here. Okay, so it turns out the problem is that null, because part of its meaning is it's some unknown value, null does not equal anything else. Null does not even equal null. Let me do this. Let me come here where true. So if I say where true, that means it's going to look at every record. Select star from. That should be okay. Okay, let's put something in here that is just true, where 1 equals 1. That's always true. Okay. So it's looking at every record and it's evaluating the where condition. Does 1 equal 1? True. And so it brings that record in. If I say here, so this evaluates the false for every record, that's going to bring back no records. So that's why when I put comment, CONT equals null, no records come back because no comment equals null. But even null, now if I had 1 equals 1, it would show me all the records because 1 equals 1. But in the world of database management, null does not equal null. Because null could mean it's an unknown value. We don't know what the value is. How could we know if it's equal to some other value that we don't know what the value is? And so null is a kind of a strange and more complex idea. But it's important for being able to say, we want to be able to put something in without a value. So let's look at how we would do that. There's a couple of approaches that I can do. Here's the first one. I'm going to take this same insert statement, bring it back here, and instead of putting a zero-length string, that actually inserts a zero-length string, and I want to have nothing there at all. I'm going to get rid of the zero-length string, and I'm going to get rid of the column. So I'm not going to say comment at all. So now I'm only inserting 3 values. What value will be in that fourth column? Nothing at all. In database lingo, it will be null. It will be null. So now I'm going to make this query bring back the ones where comment is equal to null. And the insert happens okay, but we still don't get the records. And the reason is because nothing is ever equal to null, not even itself. So when I want to check to see if something's null, I don't use equals. Instead, I use a different word here. I use a different comparison operator, and it's called is. So now I want to see the records where the comment is null. So some other folks have put those in, so stand by. I don't want you to execute for just a moment. I'm going to clear all these things out, I think. Oh, no, I'm not. So I'm going to change the number here from 40 to 140. So you should be able to see this one as the one that I just did. So there's the 140, and it is seeing it as null. So this idea of null is a complex idea, but it means the absence of a value, and it's different from the ones that are where comment equals a zero-length string. Those are still in there. And so this 140 won't show up, but some other ones will. So there's some other ones here, but that 140 is gone because the 140 has null for the comment. These are a set of 5 or 6 that have a zero-length string. In the assignment, it says, hey, if there's no value, you don't plug a value in there. So one option is to come in here and say, I'm just going to get rid of the column. Just don't put anything in for it, and then that will, of necessity, be no value in that column. The other approach is to leave the field in here, but then what do you think I put right here for the value? I actually put the word null, not in quotes. If I put it inside of quotes, it's going to put a 4-letter string, N-U-L-L. But if it's just there by itself, it'll go, oh, that's a key word. And so now let's change this from 140 to 144. Oh, hey, that's a gross. 144. And so now that one's showing up and the comment is null. So your two options on how to approach that are either change the query so that it doesn't include that column, or leave the column there and just put the keyword null in for its value. Questions? Let's go ahead and handle that inside of our code. All right. So right here, let's do this. I'm going to come here and say, if the cell that I'm looking at is blank, if that equals a 0-length string, then we'll do one thing, otherwise we'll do something else. All right, if it's blank, what do? I'm just going to not replace it in my comment. Instead of putting in the value there, I'm just going to put in the keyword null. So I'm going to look for the comment tag and replace it with null. We're partway there. You go ahead and run this, and it should run without error, but I think you'll see the problem when we run it. Looking at the syntax that we have right here, what's the problem? I've got those single quotes. Why are those single quotes there? Well, it's because those single quotes are hard-coded into my template. And they can't be there if I'm going to try to not put a value in there. So there's a couple ways I can handle this. After I've done this, I could replace all occurrences with quote, null, quote with just null. Or, which I prefer, I'm going to get rid of these single quotes here, and instead I'm going to put them in here only when I need them. So if it's null, I don't need those single quotes, but quote, single quote, double quote. But I will need them if there's actually a value to go in there. Quote, single quote, double quote. Okay. And again, I know that's hard to read, but in both cases, that is a double quote terminated string that has a single quote in it. So now the quotes only come into the query if there's something to put into the comment. Otherwise, the keyword null will go in there. We'll go ahead and run this one and make sure that it comes out looking okay for null. Yeah, the quotes are now gone from null. Let me go ahead and put a value in there. And now the quotes should come back. And there they are for, when I have a string there, it comes back in with the quotes. Okay, so that's dealing with null. Let's also take a look at, Parker is saying, have to be able to clean the data is one of the things that's a little bit problematic. In fact, I may do that not on the video. Should I do that on the video or should I just show you? The video, so you can go back and watch it, and the folks that weren't here get to see it as well. I guess I'll leave it on the video. All right. Let me come back here to my educator and just download. Oh, I probably already have it downloaded. I'm looking for the data files. Is it called crime? Crime.zip. It's probably already expanded. There we go, crime. I'm going to open up Texas because Texas got all kinds of problems. Not as a state, but as a data file. Lots of interesting things to see here. Texas, have you opened? Oh, here we go. Okay. So let's take a look at, here's Texas A&M University. I'm going to zoom in just a bit here. So question, Texas A&M University, what is the last character in this university's name? So I'm not asking what the last character in cell A42 is, I'm asking for the last character in the name Texas A&M University. So why? Yeah, the colon is not part of the name of the university. And so you're going to have to, the whole assignment here is to read through this file and put data into the database. So you've got to say, at Texas A&M University, at the College Station campus, enrollment was 49,129. You've got to create an insert statement that pushes that data into the database. And you can't have the colon there. If you look over here, here's San Antonio, the San Antonio campus. The 2 is not part of the campus name. That's a footnote there. But if you look in the data, it just looks like San Antonio 2. And so one of the things that's a challenge in this project is to say we've got to get rid of any numbers that are on the end or any colons that are on the end. I think that's the only thing you have to worry about. Parker, is there anything besides colon and numbers? Yeah, that's the number would be the superscript that we're seeing there. So if you're going to try to get rid of that, what would you do? You probably won't write the code for this, but let's just talk about it. What would you do to kind of process that? Now, cast your minds back, if you will, to the ISBN validator. We had a similar problem. We had all these characters in the ISBN, the candidate ISBN. We said, we only want the ones that are numbers. In this case, we want to say, hey, if it's a number on the very last character, forget about it. Or if it's a colon on the very last character, forget about it. So you kind of want to look at it and say, use the isNumeric function and say, yeah, if that last character is numeric, or if it's a colon, we want everything but the last character there. I hope that wasn't too cryptic. That's going to be one thing to get you headed in that right direction. We talked about the single quote, which will show up in this project. So you got to be able to deal with a single quote. You got to be able to handle null. And the one more thing that I think is going to be important to us here is how are you going to know when to stop the data? Here's good news, folks. The data begins always in A6. That's the data that you're after. But how are you going to know when to stop? They're all different lengths. What do you think? Just go down until you hit a blank cell? No good, because when you come down to Texas A&M, you hit a blank cell right there on 43. Oh, it's a merged cell. But still, if you ask what A43 is, it'll be blank. You might want to start off by getting rid of all the merged cells. That'll make your life a little bit easier in this project. Boy, how would you get rid of all the merged cells? Just record yourself getting rid of the merged cells, and you'll see the code. It's quite simple. I forget what it is, but it's easy. So blank cell won't do it. Other thoughts? How can you know when you're done with the data? Let me get down here to the bottom so you can see it. Yeah, and blank cell won't work because you've got stuff after the data, right? You've got footnotes that happen to be here in column 1. Go ahead, question. Yeah, start way at the bottom and come up. That would handle the Texas A&M problem, but it doesn't handle the footnote problem. So you'll bump into the footnotes, and you got some way to know if they're footnotes. Maybe all the footnotes start with a number. Nope, here's a note, no number here. So, and the trouble is, you're not just preparing for the 50 files that you have to process for this assignment. I think there's only 48. It's not just the 48 files, but you're trying to write code that will work for the next 48 files that come in, and the next 48 files. So kind of looking at these, you want to pick an algorithm that you think, you know what, that's going to work every time. It's not just specific to these set of files, but I think it's going to work every time. Other thoughts? How you might do it? Go ahead. Oh, interesting. So maybe, okay, so the suggestion here is maybe these are we realize these are alphabetized. So we could just check to see if they're in alphabetical order. And when we get something that's now not alphabetical, that actually might work pretty well. The code's not easy to write, but the algorithm probably would work pretty well. Because I think always you're going to end up here with a footnote or the word note. It's not guaranteed, because if your last university happens to be something lower than N, and the first note is this note thing here. So yeah, at first I thought that's pretty clever. Still pretty clever, but I don't think it's a safe way to do it. And it's not an easy way to do it either, by the way. Not too hard, but you could do it. Other thoughts? Yep. maybe the other columns. Okay, well this one won't work because we got blanks here. This one won't work because we got blanks here, but maybe this one will. So this is like the aggregate column of violent crime where we've added up the next 4 columns over. Trouble is, I know that I don't know if we have any in this file. Sometimes we have a missing number. There's a null value. It is, we don't know. It's not saying that there's no value. It's saying maybe we don't know what the value is. And the truth is, I'm not sure what happens in the aggregate column. That might be safe. So that'd be something that might be worth taking a look at because there's no data below it. There's definitely no data, at the end of the table there. Let me tell you what I think is the best way to do it, and that is to look for this line right here. So far, we've been looking at data, but this line is always there. So, yeah, the formatting. Yeah. So, so far, I think we've always looked for data, but the formatting might be helpful. So let's take a look. So let me just look at let's see, what's my active cell? Here I am on 79. So here's active cell. ACTIVE, active cell dot borders, and then we have the top XL top edge, and then there are several properties of that. Line style I think is the clean one to use. That tells me the top border has a line style of 1. If I go to a different cell down here where there's no borders and I ask for the line style, that's XL none, right? That's -4142. That's no style at all. So I could, but knowing that, I could say, when I get to the cell, by the way, you don't want to look for the bottom border because once you hit this cell, if it has the bottom border, you most likely will skip this one. You want to wait till you get to the top one. So you get to the cell that has a top border of that. Trouble is, your very first cell has that same top border. So you probably don't want to look until after you've gone through the loop once. So instead of looking at the top of the loop, look at the bottom of the loop to do your until clause at the bottom of the loop, and that will get you through that. Okay, so that should get you going in the right direction on that. And there was one other thing that came to mind. Can you think of any others, Parker? Looping data. Blast, I don't remember it. It was kind of a small one. I didn't, but yeah, that's something else. So you're only after the raw data. There are two summary columns. Violent crime is the sum of the next 4 after it. There's a property crime column, which is the sum of the next 4 after that. You don't need to enter the aggregate data. You're only looking for the raw data to go in. All right, well, maybe I'll remember it and we can talk about it next time we get together. The project's not due for what, like a week and a half still? I'm not sure. It's a couple weeks out. But now we have covered everything that you need to know to be able to do that project. So you'll have some opportunity to do that. All right, folks, thanks for coming. Class dismissed.